I'm Tyler, and this is the AntiSocial Network.
Don't look away. Let the fear wash over you.
Very compelling kind of a figure. Odd-looking duck. There's something about his eyes. Hypnotic.
A racist, a sexist, uncivil, worse than Hitler.
Welcome to your number one source of internet oddity.
This is the main thing about my listeners. They're masochists, and they listen to my show just for the pain.
Here we host conversations with interesting people across the internet.
This idea that hell is a bottomless pit, and that's because no matter how bad it is, some stupid son of a bitch like you could figure out a way to make it a lot worse.
Once I establish my theocracy, I will throw you in my dungeon and let you rot for it.
You haven't heard of them, but I have.
Doctor, turn off my cringe inhibitors.
Join us every Friday for discussions on culture, entertainment, politics, religion, and whatever happens to catch our fancy then.
Oh, my shrink was right. God does hate me.
You could bring civilization to Britain, but you could never bring Britain to civilization.
You globalist cock!
Social credit deducted.
You're probably thinking this is some pretty deep stuff, and you're right.
This week we are joined once again by ProperHorrowshow, the host of her podcast, where she goes through multiple horror movies in a week. I've been on, I believe, twice now, and she's been on my show once, and now she's back to talk about one of her recent videos. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fine. Yeah, really glad to be chatting with you.
Indeed. So, what's been going on your end? I noticed you've become the number one fan of Critical Drinker on your channel. So.
Oh man, I feel weird about that. Like, did you notice me say multiple times, I like Critical Drinker? Did I mention I'm a fan? Hey, I'm subscribed and I upvote all the Critical Drinkers videos. I made sure to mention that. Because yes, I do end up crapping on him again. I feel moderately guilty about it, but what can you do? Yeah, what's a good way to approach this? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, obviously you come from very similar political, cultural backgrounds in a lot of ways, I would assume, other than maybe some distinctions about your politics. But, like, what is it that you tend to find yourself disagreeing with him over and over again, that you've done, like, 3 or 4 videos now, kind of trying to dialogue with him?
Oh, I think I've only done 2, but I did mention him in another one, and in that one was the same issue effectively, and it was this issue of effectively not being aware of messages you agree with, having political blind spots that I see as really common. So, and that turns up in so many forms, effectively, when you've probably seen a lot of people saying, oh man, I hate the movies now are so political, they just shove the politics in. Oh, it really annoys me. I just want to watch a good movie. And it's like, that's fine, that's cool, yeah. And there will be references to older films. And what bugs me is this idea that those films don't have politics, they don't have a message. That is my chief bugbear, and lots of people have said it. The original video I made about this, How to Miss Propaganda, was responding to a good channel by the name of The Closer Look. And very handily, he gave 3 examples of propaganda-free films that were very easy to see the propaganda in. So I used that as the springboard. But in that, I mentioned The Drinker as regards, I suppose, a slight tangent. He had highlighted Midnight Mass, which I really enjoyed. I like pretty much everything Mike Flanagan does. But he highlighted that as a good, really balanced discussion on faith. Whereas I think if maybe that's just a lack of awareness on his end, because he is, as many people are these days, secular atheist. What he sees as a balanced discussion is actually quite a relentless stream of attacks with, I think, perhaps a single counterpoint that says maybe faith has something going for it. I don't know if you want to hop in on me, because I'm just going off.
No, I thought it was fine. I didn't know if you were building up to something specific beyond that, but I see what you mean. I mean, it definitely. I've had this conversation with all sorts of different people, like from different perspectives about what the role of politics is. I mean, I just this past weekend, I was having a very long conversation with my author friend, Kirk Pattycake, and she was going off about how she hates partisan politics in art, and she doesn't want to engage with it at all. She doesn't want to engage with, Republican or Democrat or anything that stinks of partisanship. And on the other side, there's my co-writer at Cultural Review, who is a based trad Catholic integralist and who doesn't like reading anything newer than 1500 AD because she thinks everything that comes after the Reformation is degenerate modernist propaganda. So you kind of there are extremes of how we of rejecting politics. Not that I think that they're particularly extreme, but as PSA Sitch says, most of our disagreements over words tend to be just disagreements over definitions. And I think that it's kind of when we're talking about the politicization. Frick, I can't say the word. Politics in film, we kind of have to make clear what angle we mean, because politics in film can mean everything from, a right-wing movie advocating against abortion to a left-wing movie with a very, very tame subtext about why racism is bad. Like, that covers the full gamut from 12 Angry Men to something that's overtly egregious politically that everyone nowadays would know about, like Star Trek Discovery or something like that. Like, well, how would you define political subtext in film?
Really good question, and as you say, a lot of this is going to be a disagreement over definitions. I think I end up using the phrase, a film has every story will need values from which I can derive a political inclination. And yeah, there is a spectrum from Casablanca in 1941, if I'm wrong, don't mock me, fix it in post. For Casablanca in 1942, 1943, 1944, I think we got it by now. Whichever one of those is correct, that is a fairly overt call for America to join the war effort. To something a lot more subtle, where there's just an emphasis on, let's say, Grave of the Fireflies, which doesn't tell you explicitly whether either side went too far in the war. It's a story, from the Japanese perspective of the Second World War. All it does is emphasize that in war there is great suffering to people who have no ability to input on the decision. And that is having a message. It's having a focus on something. It's framing the discussion around one subject that leads you to some kind of political conclusion. So we can be talking very big politics, very specific politics, and oftentimes what people are reacting to is a combination, how can I say, so somewhere on a nexus of a graph where you have, on one level, how close the politics are to your own politics, and how relentlessly, blatantly spelled out they are.
Yeah, and from my own biased perspective, I'm not against politics in film from either side. I mean, I'm working on, one of my colleagues, Ethan Collins, and I are both, we're both of the same political and religious affiliation, and we both regularly have hour-long conversations about postmodernism in art and the implications of meaninglessness, because we both can see the way these kind of themes kind of bounce around in the void, and we don't mind stuff that we don't agree with, but from a cultural perspective, I would say that the kind of politics I tend to root for in art is edifying in nature, being as in politics that is designed to kind of uplift and build morals in society as a whole. As Jonathan Peugeot tweeted out about a year or two ago, you can't really build a society when words like subversive and rebel are mainstream concepts. Like, you can't have a society that's just constantly subverting itself forever, because then it's just just it turns into a whirlpool at some point. You just kind of keep digging down and things keep getting worse. So I when it comes to politics that I think are actually useful in film, I think that there's something to be said for edifying art, and I'll usually throw out examples, like Frank Capra or Groundhog's Day as kind of just, blanket obvious examples of moralistic movies that are good movies that anyone can watch and feel, and that they come away with a better sense of life afterwards. But obviously that's a really broad example. But when it comes to do you think that what would you consider like a positive depiction or an edifying depiction of politics and art?
It's very handy you said Groundhog Day, because the example that comes right to my mind is Happy Death Day from 2017, which we've got to cheer this on. If people haven't seen this, if people saw, oh gosh, what a cheesy Blumhouse horror movie rushed out, one of their 23 titles a year, skip. No, you're missing out on an amazing film. It is basically Groundhog Day meets Scream. And in the midst of this fun scenario where your character's trying to work out why she keeps dying, who's trying to kill her, and solve her own murder over numerous iterations of the same day. In the midst of that, there's this really brilliant, edifying message about a woman who, the reading is basically, she's living a really rough life, not taking care of herself, making really bad choices. She literally can't move on with her life until she's resolved her issues. So resolved her drinking, resolved her, I will say, wanton behavior, which quite bravely and surprisingly, the film calls out as a problem, showing like she's taking these risks with people, getting intimate with people in a way that is not making her happy, is not improving her life. She hasn't solved her relationship with her father. She's avoidant there. She has to resolve all these things and the minor issue of someone who stabs her lots before she can move on with her life and become an adult. And it's such an unexpectedly edifying, wholesome message.
Yeah, I don't want to attribute to the pile on that, but the only scene I've seen of that movie is the one I believe it's the clip from the second movie where the main character swan dives into a wood chipper, which I saw that clip and I'm like, this is really edifying right here. This is really.
I know. The sequel is a very different beast. What can you throw money at a movie studio, they are going to get you a sequel as quick as they can, and quality be darned. What can I say? Tell you what, I'd throw out Train to Busan as well. We watched that we watched it a while ago, but we're all just loving that in the middle of a zombie apocalypse, the clear effort in the story was that you need to look after the people in your community, you need to stand up for them, and basically, men, you've got to chat up and take on your role. It's quite traditional in that way. And that was just really wholesome, as well as being an amazingly directed and paced action movie with a lot of emotional heft.
I know it's not an original thought to say this, but like there's a reason like a lot of young people tend to go towards Asian art nowadays. It's because they haven't really discovered wokeness in Japan or Korea, so their art tends to be a little bit more family oriented in a weird way. Not necessarily more lacking things that bother us here, as some of the Korean New Wave movies are extremely nihilistic and Marxist in undertone, but like there's a pretty clear case to be made that like anime is less political than we have in the West, because that's why a lot of young people seem to be jumping right onto that boat.
Yeah, definitely. You do have nihilistic directors. I might mangle this, but Kim Ki-duk, who did Bad Guy, I think he also did The Isle. Very hard to watch. Basically the Korean Michelle Haneke. Very talented. Can't watch his movies.
I mean, I don't want to throw out Park Chan-wook because he's a great director, but his movies are extremely hard to watch at times.
Definitely. Yeah. And then we have cases that have been raised. I mean, I think you mentioned it earlier, where they're seen as edifying and wholesome, but actually I think they're incredibly subversive. So the example I'll have to go for is 12 Angry Men, and it always gets me in trouble. You know, it's like you're wandering into someone's house and kicking their cat when you talk about that movie, but I had to say it because it's highlighted as an example of just a cool guy, just curious, just asking questions, just being a real honest actor asking questions. And my problem, as I said in the video, is Critical Drinker praises this as a film about critical analysis and critical thinking, and does not think critically about any of the arguments made. It's I mean, I won't repeat everything about that film, but effectively, if you look at the arguments and you look at the framing, the whole film is manipulating you towards supporting a conclusion.
My dad's always had the best line about 12 Angry Men. If that actually happened in real life, that jury would have been thrown the heck out, because that's not how you actually. It's not how you deliberate. You don't retry the case in the jury room.
Oh, of course not. I mean, just I see so often people just saying, like, that's cool analysis and everything, but did you consider this is a legal case and this is just reasonable doubt? So it's just following legal procedure, bro. And it's like, okay, if they're following legal procedure, yeah, they get thrown out and he's possibly prosecuted for bringing evidence into a trial, possibly charged with tampering. Who knows?
Yeah, if you want to see how that works out, go check out the state of California, where they every single criminal is out of jail in like 2 weeks. Like, see how that's really doing well for them, where anyone who's has reasonable doubt is given a pass. Like,
yeah, it's an amazing case of framing and the success of framing. Like, it is a wonderfully made, wonderfully acted film, but you have to think about it. And this idea of just keep the politics out, guys. I hate these modern politics means you don't look at this stuff. And the very simple framing of all the people who are so fixated on a guilty verdict, did you know they're racist, evil, sadistic bigots with terrible family relationships? How'd that happen? Or just the fact that you focus your story on a bunch of people who are not affected by the crime, but they're effectively encouraged to pat themselves on the back for being, you know, generous and lenient and super skeptical and giving the benefit of the doubt. Where is my sequel where we see that kid go and shank a grandma?
The Family Guy parody does that better. Like, literally at the end of the parody, Family Guy one, they're like, wait a minute, he didn't do it. That means the killer's still out there. And then the lights cut out.
Oh, I like it. You see, it's usually Harrigan who's telling me about Family Guy, and every film we have, he hasn't seen it, but he's seen the Family Guy meme. I need to start watching, clearly.
And now back to A Very David Lynch Christmas. But yeah, I think it's easier to kind of look at this from our perspective. I don't want to speak on your political perspectives, but it kind of helps to be a dissident and to look at these things from the outside. I mean, this is a conversation I've had with Anna, my co-writer, all the time about Casablanca, because she hates the romanticization of World War II, because her political leanings are more paleoconservative, and you know, anyone that comes out of the Buchanan school, they have really edgelord opinions about World War II, and she's like, you know, I don't like a film that romanticizes the idea that you should give everything for a country that's sending him off to do all this stuff. And I'm like, I guess. So it's really easy when you have like an outsider opinion. You see the kind of just neoliberal, neoconservative through lines that kind of are the base assumptions of all these artworks. And what we consider as non-political is just, you know, it's our normalcy, as you said a couple times in your videos.
Yeah, I do think there's something about, how can I say, either an emboldening in the maybe a dropping quality of the writers and the filmmakers, or a dropping quality of the audiences, that just mean that the messages have to be really, really blared out with barely any symbolism now. Like that's the thing that annoys me when it is just said. It's like, guys, at least put a metaphor in here. Don't just tell me straight out. But
part of me thinks it's the film. Part of it thinks it's the film industry as a whole is shrinking. Like, especially in especially Hollywood, like, it really feels like the middle market is dead. I mean, every year we get like 2 or 3 like adult movies that come out. Like, they make a big like show of it. It's like, hey, Ford v Ferrari's out. It's a movie for adults, and it comes out and it's really good, and it actually has some moderately sophisticated message, and it doesn't do all that well in the box office. So it just kind of goes into the award season bin and doesn't get seen ever again. But like, everything that makes money is just massive and kind of generic studio stuff. Like, it's not like the old school Hollywood where every single film was expected to have a moderate level of sophistication because you knew you were making these films for adults who wanted adult material. So, I mean, you imagine trying to release His Girl Friday in this day and age. Like, that would just drop like a frigging rock.
I don't know the film, but I'll trust you. I watch a lot of old stuff, and just the quality of writing is amazing. I could definitely nod along if you're saying like the budget is a major impact. If you're spending $200 million on a film, you need that mass market. If you make it for 25, which I don't see why you can't, you can take risks. I would much rather see sort of 8 films made for 25 million that take risks and try and be a bit more niche than these very generic $200 million ones that are just rolled out. If people are interested in this, Mark Commode, a very left-leaning English film critic, has a very good segment in his book, The Good, the Bad and the Multiplex, about why it's effectively impossible to have a flop now. So no matter how much is spent on the film, they pretty much always make their money back through a variety of financial mechanisms.
That's interesting.
Yeah, maybe interesting supplementary reading for people.
Well, they call it Hollywood accounting for a reason. Like, the money winds up in the right pockets no matter what.
Oh man, I would love to know more about that, because I think there is something about, you look at it and you think, how did this cost that much? How did you spend 100 million on this? And you probably think there's a heck of a lot of credited people who managed to hoover that up somehow.
Yeah, I mean, you see that a lot with the Marvel movies, a lot of which look like they were shot in a frigging parking lot, and then you see like Blue Ruin for $30,000, and that movie looks like it was shot on, with a gold-plated camera. Like, it's amazing the kind of incredibly lazy filmmaking that can pass through extremely expensive marketing apparatuses.
Blue Ruin was Jeremy Saulnier, yes, who did Green Room. Yeah. Oh, I liked that. I liked that a lot. That was
he's good.
A tough watch, but a really good film. To roll back a bit, I think what you said about having the outsider perspective is really key, because you get the thing where I will boldly assume we're somewhat dissident. It has been alleged. Obviously, my channel is entirely politics free. I would never dream of putting any politics into my movie reviews.
How's American History X treating you?
I thought I would get a lot more hate for my discussion of that, and I was ready for the sort of knee-jerk comments to massively misinterpret what I said. I managed to escape it. It's 12 Angry Men people get angry about.
That's weird, but I'm on the reverse side of the dissonant side. Like, it's kind of funny that this past weekend Top Gun Maverick came out, and every single leftist film critic seems to have some sort of rant about the military-industrial complex and imperialism and American war fighting somewhere in their review, because they can't just enjoy the film. I mean, I know you said you haven't seen it, but the film doesn't contextualize the actual nation that's being fought in the film at all. Like, they're literally just they're described as a rogue state with nuclear weapons development. When you see them, they live in a mountainous, snowy region. They somehow they have an air force that's combined of somehow like 40-year-old planes and next generation planes that are more expensive than the U.S. military has. and we never actually see their faces because every single one of the enemies is wearing a flight suit the entire time. So the enemy is literally 100% decontextualized, no identity, no politics at all, and the good guys are just presented as, well, they're building nuclear weapons. We have to bomb them so that they don't build nuclear weapons. And everyone's being like, oh, American militarism, how dare they? And that's the other side of the thing, is like the left-wing dissidents, because they are the ones that are always complaining about the lack of a lot of the politics they want in it. They want their worldview like represented thoroughly, and they've been getting it more lately. But it's really interesting to see when they don't get their wish, and just how nuanced their critiques tend to be. They're either nuanced or lacking of nuance, depending on how you look at it.
Definitely, they are in a weird way. They're in a similar situation to us. They can see that the politics-free film actually is just the politics of the current mainstream. And a lot of the problems that people are having now who are more centrist and nice and light and centrists are their message was effectively set. The level of the message that they're comfortable with was probably set about, oh gosh, I only said 10 years ago, and then I remembered I'm really old.
We all are. It's a fault. So what are you gonna do?
Keeps happening. It was set a long time ago. The films they were watching in their teens, in their 20s. And you sort of settle on that, and then it moves on, and people say, "Oh, come on, it's getting a bit political now." But you show the films of the 90s to your parents and grandparents, and they can see lots of stuff going on. That you just wouldn't remark on. So we're in a weird situation where we can see, like the leftists, we can see a message. And I think everyone should be able to look at the films in this way. Not just because it's you paying closer attention to the movie and able to understand what it's saying and think on it in that level. It's just another tool to your analysis that makes your understanding of the film better. But also, it helps you clarify what your positions and your values are. You end up with, when you don't do that, you end up in weird positions where you just can't justify what you say. So the example I've seen a few times, there's a creator who I think thinks very differently to me, JXE, amazing analysis, amazing eye for detail, did a 5 hours, 14-minute video about the Jodie Whittaker's Doctor Who, and just astounding analysis. So that is all my praise towards Jay. Great creator, would disagree with me a heck of a lot. And Jay was in a conversation with another Doctor Who channel called Bolstrek, who is taking the line of, gosh darn it, Doctor Who's gotten so darn woke now. And Bolstrek, he's highlighting the fact that the Doctor got a black lesbian companion, I think Bill Potts, I have not watched it in a while, who talks about her identity frequently. It's impossible to miss. If you did not get the memo, Bill Potts, sapphic companion. And Jay's response to this was a very simple, but the Doctors had heterosexual companions who don't hide their relationship, and they talk about their relationship a heck of a lot. What's the problem, big guy? What's going on? And Bolstrek then is just very stuck there. He didn't have an answer because I think he hadn't thought it through. He instinctually, and this is something PSA Sitch would pick up, his moral elephant, as it were, had picked up that something was happening, that politics were occurring, but he hadn't mentally thought through what the issue was. If you ask him, he would say, yeah, the implication is you have a problem with gay relationships. And if you ask him, he would say, oh, no, of course not. They're fine, they're valid, I don't have any problem. But put him in that context, it's like, oh, hang on, why do I have a problem with this? I haven't thought this through. If you don't think it through, then you're not going to be able to defend it, and you're not really understanding your position.
it's a reactionary impulse that people tend to have, like especially when they start smelling that something is wrong. But most people just don't know how to articulate it. Like a lot of people, like you see this all the time on the news when someone they go to a protest, the parents who are against critical race theory, and then the gotcha journalists walk up to and define the word. Well, I don't know how to describe it, and it's like, see, they don't know what it is. And I mean but you don't have to be able to know what a thing is to sense that there's something off about it. Like that's kind of the sense you get from a lot of the non-political side of the argument. You see it in the Dankula discussion that you talked about, and you kind of even see it in like Gamergate and Comicsgate to some degree, where it's people sense that there's a problem with turning all of the Avengers and replacing them with politically correct young based alternatives, or young, or whatever you want to call it. But it's really hard.
What's the problem? They were all straight white males before. What's the problem, big guy? If you haven't thought through, you can't answer it.
On paper, there's nothing wrong with doing having another character put on an Iron Man suit and run around being Iron Man. But when lots of things are happening at once, and the writing quality goes down, and you just kind of generally sense that this is being done for some sort of nefarious alternative ends, it really shoots up all your alarm bells. And I don't think that they're wrong to do that. I just, I agree with you. I just think for the most part, most of them aren't fully articulating what it is that bothers them. I mean, this is something Distributus talked about in his video on Gamergate, which is, if you're Anita Sarkeesian and you just see this entire flood of people screaming at you on the internet, you have no reason to assume that they aren't just being, irrational and reactionary and not actually laying out their positions, even though most of them have reasonable opinions and they're just trying to have conversations. It's really easy to kind of get lost in that discussion and not really understand that, at the end of the day, your base reactions are sensing something off in the same light, like you said, that your grandparents looking at 90s television sensed something was off, but they didn't know how to articulate it.
Yeah, really good example, because it gets awkward. You end up in sort of spicy territory that sets people off and people make automatic assumptions. So a safer example is swearing. Swearing in films, just now incredibly commonplace. But your grandparents would have noticed and said, oh, swearing a heck of a lot. And it's one of those ones where it's like, you can try, someone will say, well, what's the harm? People talk like that. It's just representing reality. But you notice that change and it gets snuck in. I think the big thing that people sense is they're aware that someone is doing this for a reason. And I think there is a lot of strength in kind of not trying to go on any kind of universalist principle, but be straight up partisan and just kind of own it. And just be like, oh yeah, I like this movie because it's my values. Yeah, that's good. I like those values. I want them promoted. They're great. Let me tell you about my values. Rather than just sort of, oh, I just like a good story. It's like, no, I like a story that supports what I feel in my heart. Well, I want that promoted.
Swearing is a really good example of that too, because you're right that back in the day people did swear, but there was always a kind of decorum that still existed around certain words. Like, you don't drop certain words at the dinner table. You do it at the bar, or you do it in the privacy of your own home, because at the end of the day, a taboo like that was ultimately about kind of preserving proper etiquette and proper place for proper hierarchical places for things that are low down and dirty. Like, you don't walk into a church and start screaming at the priest. You don't
yeah, they hate that.
they ask you to leave. How dare they? But with the moment that taboo goes away, suddenly everything follows behind it, and now the top 100 list is just filled with Cardi B, WAP remixes, because the taboo that kept, saying a word is that's kind of degenerate or degraded is gone, and now that's the at the heart of the cathedral. Now that's the new the new thing that everyone does, and it becomes more protected over time.
Totally. With swearing, really good example, because you can just say, you will be hit with, what's the harm, big guy? What's the problem? Rationally show. Now that I have rationally told you what can count as a bad result, tell me where the bad result is that I have predefined. You can't. Instead, you just say, yeah, I don't like that. That's my values are like, we don't say those words. And you work with kids. You have to sometimes tell them like it's not appropriate. And it would be hard to rationally say why. This was something very similar to one of the examples I highlighted as a recency bias was, bless him, and I hate complaining about him so much because he's a nice guy. I've hung out with him. He's a good lad in real life. But Dankula saying that the 80s, it was tough because it was full of Puritans. I'm like, my dude.
My brother in Christ, no.
Yes. You were just talking about aliens. Like, how are you saying there are if there are Puritans in Hollywood, they would not have been made. Disney's Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs was rejected by the censors 3 times because they felt that was too extreme. The BBFC, the British Board of Film Censorship, as it was, it's now the British Board of Film Certification. Back in 1916, their first chairman laid out 42 rules of things that could not be in the movie, just blanket no. And if you read those, you see how much of it is just a lovely, distinct partisan preference. There's a real set of values in there, rather than just an attempt to go to a kind of universalist. I think this would cause some harm, maybe somehow. But the original values are just straight up. You cannot defame the church. You cannot criticize the Queen. Just sort of straight up owning the partisanship. So just in comparison to that, saying the decade in which you can release Total Recall, RoboCop, Society, The Thing, saying that Puritans were in Hollywood during that, I'm struggling.
I don't want to dunk on Dankula too hard. We're
He's
about,
a lovely guy.
Yeah, we're about out of time, but I don't think there's a clear, consensus point that this podcast is necessarily building up to beyond just, grapple with your biases, question the narratives, don't just go with what's consistently told to you. I mean, as silly as I think the Top Gun criticism is, it's not like he's totally off. People do see see things in different perspectives, but just don't go. If you want a more condensed version of that, go check out her channel. Do you want to shout out something real quick?
Oh, yeah, sure. So if people aren't familiar with me, I run ProperHorrowshow. We stream every Tuesday at 8 p.m. UK time. The stream's called Double Feature Horror Show. We do a horror topic, and then we discuss a horror film in depth. And that is every single week. And I also release occasionally sort of larger, in-depth videos that take a lot more editing. So the last one was on, critical drinkers, critical blinkers, as I failed to call it because I'm an idiot.
That's gonna wind up in this title, but
thank you.
But
and the other one, the one I'm really proud of, I would love people to see, is a massive video that I did on.
I am going to elegantly slice these 2 audio clips together so it sounds completely seamless. But anyway, you were talking about.
Too passionate, darn it! We're just too passionate. Yeah, I was just going to say, I really wanted to direct people towards a work I'm really, really proud of, which is a hour-long exploration of pro and anti-abortion symbolism and messaging in horror films. So I divide it relatively equally down a whole bunch of pro-choice messages and then a whole bunch of pro-life messages, and show you how the symbolism is built into films. It's going to be things that you maybe haven't thought of in that way, so that Alien and Aliens feature heavily, which is why I immediately jumped on Critical Drinker saying Alien and Aliens have no politics. And maybe some ones that will surprise you, like The Wicker Man and Misery. And I've had good responses to that, so I'd love people to watch it. I aim to keep that as balanced as possible, and I think that turned out really well.
I was gonna say, now that I've relaunched the call, if we actually have a little more time than I thought we would. Was there anything that we hadn't talked about before in the first 40 minutes that you still wanted to talk about?
Let's see. I am having a little look over everything. You know, I think we managed everything that I was going to try and get in. Basically, just rather than saying the film has no messaging, look at the messaging is, think about it, and you don't have to agree with it. You know, there's lots of well created messaging that I wouldn't personally agree with, but I appreciate how it was done. I think it was artful. I think it was very well integrated, and you can appreciate that. And the other effect of it is, if you're looking out for it, it kind of stops the frog being boiled, as it were.
Yeah.
That things can't slowly slip in and ratchet up.
I would add this caveat too to my point from earlier, like, because if we're talking about political messaging in the writ large sense, not just I'm making a propaganda film, I'm making Star Trek Discovery about, everything Star Trek Discovery is about. But if you want to look at politics in a larger sense, look at it in a sense of, what is this film, what is the society that this film is building up or tearing down? Like, what is the effect of a film like this going to be? Because I know so many people that they go into a movie, they want to see an action movie, and then they disengage for 2 hours, and then they're done with it. They don't really. I mean, and I get that. Most people, they get off work, they want to go out to a movie, and they want to go on autopilot and not have to kind of deal with implications and emotional strife, and they don't enjoy that aspect of the art. But if you do want to engage with film on a secondary level, or anything, if you do value the art aspect of it, it's worth following that Pajot quote I found earlier, where, is this something that's designed to build you up, build up society, build up values, or is this tearing things down, making it obfuscating, making it harder to understand things, making it harder to actually, run a society? Like 12 Angry Men's a great example of that. Great movie. I own a copy of it. It's also a movie that if you take its values extremely seriously, you will never be able to prosecute a criminal ever again. You will never be able to actually operate a criminal justice system. And, every movie has some level of secondary context like that. And no, you don't have to engage with it if that's not what you want to do. Like, I would never tell my friends that hate politics they have to do that. But there is always it's always worth checking your biases.
I think that's a really good way of framing it. I think the description I used in the video is something like, you notice that the old standards, the traditional morals and ethics, your fathers and grandfathers, how sexist am I? Politics were, well, my grandmother was very immoral. There's a reason I don't cite her. Their ethics and morals they get told to be tolerant, to liberalize, hey, don't be so restrictive. And then you notice new messages come in that are treated with great reverence. There's no tolerance and liberalizing there. Those are to be taken super serious. And thinking of it on that lens, I think, is really helpful. But the way Jonathan Pajot phrases it sounds really good. I haven't watched as much of him as I should, but the things I've seen I've been very impressed by.
I'll dig up that tweet, because it's I go back to it all the frigging time. Like, it is it's like the summation of every problem with modern film media, where everything is deconstructionist. And I don't mind deconstructionist fiction, but there has to be a point behind it. And so often it's just easy. It's just easy to get down to the core where, they dig into the core and all they manage to reinvent is a one-dimensional revenge flick, a la, Tarantino. That's the deeper meaning he seeks is just progressive tribalism, and that's the only value that you can really dig out of the bottom of at the end of the day. Because at the end of the day, that's what things degenerate into. You tear down a society, and all you get left with is cavemen. You wind up with two groups of cavemen beating each other with sticks. That's it. That's the end. That's the end stage.
Yeah.
Which is literally our political system now.
Yeah. Why should your values have any primacy? How are they any better? And you have to shrug and say, "Oh no, because they're mine. I like them. In fact, I'm going to go and get another one. There's an offer on at the store. I'm going to get a grab bag."
There you go. But yeah, I don't know if there's much else to add at this point. But yeah, it's good to talk to you. Definitely go follow her and everything she does, and YouTube and Twitter. And thank you so much for coming on. It was great to talk to you again.
It is an absolute pleasure. And you know what? If you check my channel out and you enjoy it, tell you what, do yourself a treat. Check out Double Indemnity from 1941. Just see a really old movie, probably one you'd never consider. Look at the writing, see how it's constructed, see how people talk to each other.
Love it.
And I think you'll enjoy it. Thank you so much, I really appreciate it.
All right. Have a good day.
You too. All the best. Bye.
The AntiSocial Network is a Groupthink Productions and cultural review podcast. Editing, hosting, and producing are by Tyler Hummel, art by Crystal Cali, and original music is composed by Guap Squad Gang and Melissa Lafira. Like, subscribe, and leave a comment below and tell us anyone you think would be a good guest for the show. Thank you for listening.